The night my father handed me a cashier's check for $250,000, I handed it back without touching it. I set it on the granite countertop of the kitchen I grew up in, slid it toward him with 2 fingers like it was something I'd found on the bottom of my shoe, and I said, "I don't need this anymore. I haven't needed anything from you in a long time." He looked at my mother. My mother looked at the check. Neither of them looked at me. That was 3 months ago. I'm still not sure they understand what happened. I'm not sure I want them to. But let me start where it actually started, because the ending only means something if you know what came before it. I was 17 years old when my parents told me I had until Friday to make a choice. It was a Tuesday in October, my junior year of high school, and I had just told them I was pregnant. I remember the exact moment the words left my mouth, the way the kitchen went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming, the way my mother set down her coffee cup without making a sound, the way my father pulled off his reading glasses and folded them slowly, deliberately, like he was buying time to decide who he was going to become in the next 30 seconds. He became someone I didn't recognize. They both did. My father was a civil engineer. My mother taught piano lessons to the children of other people in our neighborhood in Beaverton, Oregon. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, and more than anything, we were respectable, a word my mother used, the way some people use religion, like it was both a shield and a reason to do things that needed justifying. We were a respectable family. We lived in a respectable neighborhood. I went to a respectable school and made respectable grades and was expected to have a respectable future. Nathan was not part of that plan. Nathan worked at the hardware store 2 miles from our school. He was 18, he wasn't going to college, and his father drove a delivery truck for a regional grocery chain. My mother had met him exactly once, at a school fundraiser, and I watched her smile at him the way she smiled at things she'd already decided to dismiss. Polite, distant, final. They had never told me I couldn't see him. They had never needed to. The look was enough. The silence at the dinner table when I mentioned his name was enough. I was supposed to understand, and for a long time I pretended I did, and then I stopped pretending. On that Tuesday in October, my father told me that if I was going to continue down this path, I could not do it in his house. He said the baby was a mistake that I had the option to correct, and that if I chose not to correct it, then I was choosing a life they could not be part of. He said this quietly, without raising his voice. That was the thing about my father. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. My mother cried. Later, I would learn to recognize that her tears were not for me. They were for herself, for the version of her life that my choices were interrupting. I asked for until Friday, and they gave it to me. I called Nathan from the parking lot of a Safeway that night, sitting on the curb behind my car so no one would see me. He didn't say anything for a long moment after I told him. Then he said, "Okay, we figure it out." Like it was simple. Like the path forward was obvious. We just had to walk it. That was Nathan. That was always Nathan. On Friday morning, I packed 2 bags. My mother stood in the doorway of my bedroom and watched me. She didn't help. She didn't speak. When I carried the first bag past her, she put her hand on my arm for just a second, and I stopped. And I genuinely thought she was going to say something that would change everything. She said, "Don't embarrass us." I picked up my second bag and I walked out. Nathan's parents were not wealthy, and they were not particularly prepared for any of this, but they were kind in a way that made me understand for the first time that kindness is something separate from circumstance. His mother made up the couch in their living room for me and put a set of towels outside the bathroom door and never once made me feel like a problem she hadn't asked for. His father shook Nathan's hand and said, "You do right by her." And Nathan said, "I know, Dad," and I had to look at the ceiling. I finished high school. Nathan worked double shifts. We got a 1-bedroom apartment in Hillsboro when I was 8 months along, and it was small, and the carpets were ugly, and the bathroom faucet had a slow drip that we never fully fixed. And I loved it in a way I have never loved any place I've lived since, because we built it. We built every part of it. Our daughter was born on a Thursday in July. We named her Mia. I will tell you honestly that I never fully anticipated what it would feel like to become a mother at 18. The tiredness is something they describe, but you cannot understand until it lives in your bones. The fear is something no one really tells you about. not the regular fear, but the specific fear of having something so necessary to your survival that the thought of losing it becomes a kind of constant background noise you learn to function through. I was scared all the time. I was exhausted all the time. I was also, underneath all of that, something I hadn't expected. I was grounded. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was supposed to be. I enrolled in community college when Mia was 5 months old. I studied business, then real estate. Nathan got a promotion at the hardware store, then another, and started talking about eventually managing his own location. We weren't moving fast, but we were moving. My grandmother, my father's mother, a small, sharp woman from Astoria who had always operated by her own rules, regardless of what anyone else thought, found out about Mia through my aunt. She called me on a Sunday afternoon, and instead of the disappointment I braced for, she said, "Send me a picture. I want to see her." I sent a photo of Mia asleep in her bouncer, one arm thrown over her head the way babies sleep, like they own every room they're in. My grandmother called back and said, "She looks like a fighter." She was the only person from my family who kept that thread connected. I held on to it carefully. For 3 years, things were hard, and they were also, in the way that hard things sometimes are, very good. And then Nathan died. I have written and rewritten this part in my mind more times than I can count, trying to find a way to say it that makes it feel like what it was, and I haven't found one. He was 22 years old. He was driving home from a late shift, a road he had driven 100 times, and a delivery truck ran a red light at the intersection of Cornell and 185th. The paramedics told me later that it had been very fast. Mia was 3 years and 4 months old. I don't have words for the weeks after that. What I have is a collection of specific, unimportant details that my brain decided to preserve instead. The sound of the funeral home's air conditioning. The fact that someone brought a casserole with too much pepper. The way Mia kept asking where the truck was, because Nathan had promised to take her to see a truck, and she couldn't understand why that promise had become a thing with no future. His parents were devastated. They held me up in those weeks in a way I will never be able to adequately thank them for. His mother watched Mia 3 days a week so I could work. His father helped me apply for the small life insurance payout Nathan had through his job. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep us in our apartment for 6 months while I found my footing. I found it. I don't entirely know how, but I found it. I got my real estate license when Mia was 4. I started selling properties in the Portland suburbs, slowly at first, then with more confidence. I discovered that I was good at reading people, at understanding what they actually wanted versus what they said they wanted, at making them feel certain when they were standing in the middle of uncertainty. These were things I had learned, I think, by surviving. By the time Mia started kindergarten, I was paying my bills without fear. By the time she was in 2nd grade, I was saving. By the time she was in middle school, I had my broker's license, a small team working under me, and a house of my own 3 bedrooms, in a neighborhood where the streets had trees old enough to have opinions. I did not hear from my parents during any of this. Once, when Mia was about a year old, I sent them a photo. I told myself it didn't matter, and I practiced telling myself that until it started to be partially true. My grandmother told me, over the years, small things about them in the careful way people share information they're not sure you want. She told me my brother Daniel had graduated college, gotten a job in finance in Seattle. She told me my parents had retired and moved to a house on the coast outside of Lincoln City, something they'd always talked about. She did not tell me whether they asked about me, and I did not ask whether they did. When Mia was 12, she asked me why she didn't know her grandparents on my side. I had always known this question was coming and had spent years preparing an answer, and when it finally arrived, all my preparation dissolved. I told her the truth, a version of it that was honest but not armed, because she was 12 and she was mine and she didn't deserve to carry the weight of it yet. I told her that my parents and I had made choices that took us in different directions, and that when she was older we would talk about it more completely. She nodded with the particular seriousness she had always had, even as a small child, and she said, "Okay, but I'm on your side," like it was something she'd already decided. She has always been like that. Decided. She is 15 now, and she looks like Nathan in the way that sometimes makes me catch my breath, the same dark eyes, the same way of going still when she's thinking, the same absolute certainty in her own position. She plays piano. She learned from YouTube videos. Stubbornly. Entirely on her own. Which would have horrified my mother in a way that gives me a complicated kind of satisfaction. She wants to study environmental law. She reads more books than anyone I have ever met. She is the best person I know, and I had almost nothing to do with creating who she is. She created herself. The letter arrived on a Wednesday in March, 14 months ago. My grandmother, who was 81 and had never owned a smartphone and communicated primarily by handwritten notes and phone calls made from her landline, had apparently mentioned to my father at Christmas that I had done well for myself, that I had a teenager, that I seemed happy. This was, I would later understand, the piece of information that opened something in my father's thinking. The letter was typed, 2 pages, formal. My father wrote the way he spoke, without raised voice, without apparent emotion, with the specific, careful quality of someone who has rehearsed. He said that he and my mother had been thinking a great deal. He said that time and perspective had given them a different understanding. He said that families sometimes made decisions they came to regret, and that he hoped I was open to a conversation. He did not apologize. The word never appeared. He referred, in the second page, to your son twice. I read that part 3 times. Then I set the letter down and looked out the window of my kitchen for a long moment, watching a neighbor's dog sit in the middle of the lawn next door, with the serene self-satisfaction of an animal who had nowhere to be. My grandmother had apparently told them I had a child. And somewhere in the translation, or somewhere in my father's assumptions, the child had become a son, a grandson, something more legible to him, I suppose. Something that fit better into the story he told himself about how families were supposed to work. I thought about writing back to correct it immediately. I thought about not writing back at all. I thought about a third option for a few weeks and let it sit in the back of my mind while I went about my life. Then my brother called. I hadn't spoken to Daniel in 9 years. He had reached out once, in my mid-20s, a brief and uncomfortable phone call that ended with both of us retreating behind politeness. This call was different. He was getting married. He was having an engagement party in Portland, at a venue downtown, in 6 weeks. He wanted me there. He said he'd always regretted how things had gone. He said, and this surprised me enough that I had to sit down, that he thought our parents had been wrong. His voice was careful and a little stiff, the way voices are when people say true things they've been holding for a long time and aren't sure how they'll land. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked to Mia. She listened to the whole story, the complete version, the one without the protective softening I'd given her at 12, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I think you should go. I think you should bring me. I asked her if she was sure. She said, they've been telling people they have a grandson for months. Grandma mentioned it to someone at church. I know about it. You know about it. Don't you want to be in the room when they figure out what they actually have? She is 15. She has always been decided. I called Daniel and told him we would come. The engagement party was at a restaurant event space in the Pearl District, the kind of room with exposed brick and Edison bulbs and small plates of food that are elegant but not quite enough to be filling. There were maybe 80 people. My brother met me at the door and he looked, to my complicated surprise, genuinely happy to see me. He hugged me, and it was a real hug, not a performance of one. And I felt something shift very slightly in my chest without my permission. He looked at Mia. His expression was one I hadn't expected, something near wonder. He said, she looks exactly like him. I said, I know. My parents were across the room. My mother saw me first. I watched the process move across her face in a kind of sequence recognition, calculation, something she tried to make look like warmth. She touched my father's arm. He turned. He looked older. They both did, which sounds obvious but still landed with a strange weight. My father's hair was fully white. My mother had the same posture, that precise uprightness she had always maintained, but there was something more careful about it now, like it was requiring more effort. They came across the room together, moving toward us through clusters of guests, and I stood still and let them come. My mother said, Claire. She said it the way you say a word you haven't pronounced in a long time and are checking whether your mouth still knows how. I said, Mom, neutral, informational. My father looked at Mia, and there it was. The thing I had been waiting, quietly, to see. He had expected a boy. Maybe he had built a whole picture around it, the grandson, the inheritor, the clean second chapter. Instead, he was looking at a 15-year-old girl with her father's eyes and her own very certain expression, wearing a dark green dress she had picked out herself, standing with her weight evenly distributed in the way of someone who is not waiting for permission to take up space. My mother recovered first. She said, "And this must be," and paused in a way that lasted a beat too long. Mia said, "Mia." She put out her hand. "It's nice to meet you." My mother shook it. My father shook it. There was a moment, not long, maybe 5 seconds, where no one spoke. Then my father said, "We thought your grandmother mentioned we understood you had a son." I let the sentence sit in the air between us for exactly as long as it deserved. Then I said, "No, I have Mia." My mother looked at me. My father looked at Mia. Mia looked at my father with the pleasant, politely curious expression she uses when she is deciding whether something is worth her time. What happened in the next hour was not a dramatic confrontation. It was something quieter and in some ways harder. We sat at a table in the corner, the 4 of us and Daniel and his fiancée, and my parents did the thing they had apparently decided to do, which was to behave as though the preceding 15 years were a weather event that had simply passed. My mother asked Mia about school. My father asked me about work. They were careful and considered, and completely unwilling to say the real thing. I let it continue because I was watching something. My parents had arrived that evening with a story they'd told. I understood this gradually, listening to the way they referenced our granddaughter to other guests who stopped by the table, the slight overcorrection of it, the speed with which they adopted the new narrative. I had heard through my grandmother, in the months since the letter, that my parents had told people in their Lincoln City community that they had a grandchild in Portland. A grandson. Those people understood. An only grandchild. The family was close. The story had apparently gone. Things had been difficult, but families worked things out. None of that was true. But it had been true in the telling, and there were people at this party, my parents' friends, couples from their retirement community who had driven up for Daniel's celebration who believed it. Midway through the evening, my father asked if we could speak privately. We found a quieter corner near the bar. My mother stood beside him. He reached into his jacket and took out an envelope. And inside the envelope was the cashier's check, $250,000, which I had never in my life seen written out on a piece of paper with my name on it. He told me it was from the sale of some investments. He told me he wanted to do right by us. He used the word reconnect twice, and going forward 3 times, and said something about wanting to be part of Mia's life, wanting the opportunity. He did not say he was sorry. The word, again, did not appear. I looked at the check for a moment. I thought about what it represented, not the money, but the logic underneath it. The idea that this was a transaction, that there was an amount that corresponded to what had happened, that the exchange of it would settle something. I thought about Nathan's parents' couch, the ugly carpet, the dripping faucet, the casserole with too much pepper. I thought about Mia, at 3 years old, asking about the truck. I thought about every single morning I had gotten up and rebuilt, not because it was dramatic or heroic, but because there was a small person who needed breakfast, and a person making her breakfast was the only version of me that mattered. I set the check back down on the bar and I slid it toward my father. I said, "I don't need this anymore. I haven't needed anything from you in a long time." My mother made a sound. My father looked at the check like it had done something to confuse him. I said, "I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." I paused. "Why did you come back? Actually, not the version you've been telling people." My father said, "I told you. We want to be part of." "Why now?" I said. "Why not when she was 3 and I was 21 and her father had just died and I was working 2 jobs? Why now? When she's 15 and impressive and I own my own business and there's nothing you need to rescue us from?" The silence that followed was the most honest thing either of them offered all evening. My mother said, finally, That's not fair, Claire." I said, "I know. A lot of things weren't fair. I wasn't angry. That's the thing I want to be clear about. Because people always expect the anger in this part of the story, and I understand why. But what I actually felt was a very deep and settled calm, the kind that only exists on the other side of something you've already finished grieving. I had grieved this. I had grieved it at 22, in a too small apartment with a toddler and a job I wasn't sure I was good enough for. I had grieved it at 25 when Mia started asking questions that had my parents' absence somewhere inside them. I had grieved it slowly and without ceremony over the years, the way you grieve things that never had a funeral. And I had come out the other side of it lighter than I expected. They had not been there for the grief. They didn't get to be there for the resolution. I said, "I'm going to leave the check here. You can take it back or you can throw it away." I picked up my glass. "I genuinely hope you have a good night." I walked back to the table where Mia was talking to Daniel's fiancé about something that was making them both laugh, and I sat down, and I watched my daughter for a moment, the way she gestured when she was explaining something, the way she pushed her hair back, the absolute ease of her, and I felt something that I've been trying to name accurately ever since. It wasn't triumph. It was something simpler. It was the specific satisfaction of a person who built something real and got to see it standing. Later, on the drive home, Mia was quiet for a few miles. Then she said, "They thought having money made them right." I said, "Yes." She said, "Did it make you sad, seeing them?" I thought about it honestly before I answered, because she has always deserved honest answers. I said, "A little. Not the way it used to. More like seeing a place you used to live and noticing it's smaller than you remembered." She looked out the window. The city was thinning out around us, the lights spacing out, the road opening up toward home. She said, "I think Daniel's nice." I said, "I think so too." She said, "Can we still see him without them?" I said, "I think that might be possible." She nodded once. The way she nods when she's filed something and is moving on. The thing about being disowned at 17 is that it teaches you a particular lesson very early, which is that you are more capable than anyone, including you, believes. Not in a motivational poster way. In the grinding, practical, Tuesday morning way of a person who simply does not have the option of not being capable. You get up. You figure out the next thing. You get up again. My parents wanted credit for the person I became, which is a remarkable thing to want credit for when you had no part in the making of her. They wanted a grandson to show their community, which says more about what they were looking for than any apology ever could. What they got, if they were paying attention, was something better and more honest. A daughter who didn't need them, and a granddaughter who could look them in the eye and know exactly who she was. My grandmother called me the Sunday after the party. She was 81, and entirely unapologetic, and had, it turned out, known exactly what she was doing when she told my father how well I'd done. She said, "How did it go?" It wasn't a question quite. I said, "I think everyone learned something." She made the sound she makes that means she is satisfied. Then she said, "Mia should come visit me this summer. I'll teach her to make the halibut chowder." I said, "She would love that." She said, "Good. Tell her to bring an appetite. I don't make small portions." I laughed. She hung up before I stopped laughing, which is exactly how she operates. That night I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine and listened to the neighborhood settle into evening, a dog somewhere, a lawn sprinkler starting up and shutting off, the specific, comfortable quiet of a place that is yours. The house I had bought for us, in the neighborhood with the old trees. The place I had gotten to because I had made, at 17, the only decision I could have made and still remained myself. Inside, I could hear Mia playing piano. She was working on something she'd been teaching herself for weeks, a piece I didn't know, something that kept circling back to the same 3 notes before opening up into something larger. She would get it wrong and stop and start again without frustration, just with patience, just with the steady certainty of someone who knows they'll get there. She was Nathan's daughter in that too. I listened to her figure it out, measure by measure, note by careful note, until she finally played the whole thing through without stopping. And the music came through the window and into the night, and I stayed very still and let it arrive. Some things you build alone. Some things, if you are careful and you are lucky and you do not let other people's definitions of you take hold, You build better than anyone who gave up on you ever imagined possible. That's not a speech. That's just what happened. That's just my life.